Hello, welcome to Paint by Blunders. It's been a while. Today we are looking at the new Skaventide Rat Ogors. We're going to use a mix of standard highlighting, dry brushing, as you would expect, but we're going to be using a few oil washes. But don't panic if you don't use oil washes. I have put the GW sort of classic alternatives in there as well. I hope you enjoy the video. Let's get to it. So, our Rat Ogre. Here he is in all his glory. Primer wise, all I've done is given it a black prime and then gone over the top with a light grey, white, like a xenophil looking thing. Mainly just because it helps me pick out the details when I'm painting. The reason why I like to do the black first is just so that if I miss anything in the little nooks and crannies, it just looks like a shadow. So, flesh tone first. Pink Flesh from Scalecolor. Big fan of Scalecolor. I've only just started using these a bit more. I love how matte they dry, and they're quite a thick paint as well, so it's a little bit more of the thinning than I would normally do, like the classic 50-50 for the airbrush work. Also, I would say you don't need to do airbrush this at all. I would do it with a brush. I thought there was a lot more skin on this guy than there really is. A lot of it is fur. If you didn't want to use this colour, you could easily use Bugman's Glow if you're well into GW paints. Another fantastic option for base layering skin. And with that all done, we are going to start looking at the metallics first. Metallic wise, there isn't a great deal on them, but I'm using Vallejo metal colour steel, but you can use any, whatever your flavour of the month is with metallics. But I really like this. It is an airbrush paint and it is very thin. That's the only negative for me, but I think some people like it for that reason, but I don't. But they are fantastic metal colours and it's well worth getting a couple for your arsenal. If you're using GW paint, you could easily use lead belcher for this, like a darker metal, but it all depends with the washing stages, etc. You could easily use a lighter metal. There's so little areas of metal, you could probably use whatever you like. It just depends how dark you want it to be. Once that's done, we are going to start moving on to the brass sections, or whatever your secondary metal colour is, if you choose to do one. But I've gone for Runelord Brass, but this time I've mixed in a little bit of Necro Gold. The reason I've done this is, one, just to give it a little bit more coverage, because the Runelord Brass doesn't cover very well. And secondly, I wanted it to be a bit more of a yellowy colour to it, just so it pops more against what I'm doing, like the green armour. For those of you who look at a colour wheel, green and yellow work together very well. And I just showed you the other gold, just to show how there's orangey golds and yellow golds. Also, I realised on the model I'm painting doesn't have much of that colour, so I just wanted to show you on one of the other fellas just how it starts to look. So, I'm going to start looking at the armour now. Loren Forest we're going to use as the base for this. You could use Deathworld Forest if you wanted to, put a bit more contrast and really build up those greens. But I'm being a little bit lazy, so I'm going to go straight with the mid-tone green, which is the majority of the green I'm going to be using, which is Loren Forest. 2 thin coats of this one because it doesn't cover very well. So an easy win after the green armour's done. We're going to be using Screamer Pink, and just to go over like the pipe work and all the little cables and tubes that are coming off the rat. And again, we're doing the ugly method of painting, as I call it, which is where we block in 90% of the colours before we start doing the washes. This way it's just a lot more forgiving. If you make mistakes, you can constantly go back and forth and just touch them in and correct them as you go, when you haven't gone too far into finishing an area. So next up, another easy win. We're going to do the browns. I'm just going to use Warm Brown by Pro Acrylic, but you could use Wildwood if you wanted to save some time. Mornfang Brown. As I say, these details are so minor that just use any that you feel comfortable with that has a semi-decent coverage. After that, we're going to start looking at the cloths, the little loin cloths that these fellas have, and I'm going to use Rakarth Flesh, a colour that I absolutely love. This is another one where the coverage isn't always great first time, so 2 thin coats, and just being careful when working into the areas that we've done, like the belt, etc., and where it connects. Another quick easy one, Zandri Dust. I'm just going to use it to base the nails and any wrappings of like bandage, etc. that might be around any of the pipeworks or wounds, etc. After that, we're going on to the main colour, which I thought was the flesh when I was mistaken, which is the fur. I'm using Vallejo model colour, I think it's called German Grey. Really like it. I think it's nice and matte. I've got a thing about nice matte paints. Coverage is fantastic. It thins down so well as well. Really like it. I think it's slightly darker than Eshin Grey. So if you're using GW paints, Eshin Grey is probably where you wanna be. But this is slightly darker, but that doesn't matter too much. And again, we're just going around trying to be nice and careful not to go onto the bare flesh sections, and 2 thin coats would be ideal for this one. Thinning it down ever so slightly on the wet palette. So once all that's done, we're going to do some dry brushing just to highlight the fur straight away. And all I'm going to use is Administratum Grey mixed in with a little bit of our base colour, which is the German Grey. And I'm just going to dry brush over the fur just to give it a little bit of a highlight, just because the way we wash the fur means that we don't have to do much highlighting afterwards, or at least I don't. So it's the same thing with your dry brushing. Hardly anything on the brush, a nice small dry brush, and then just give it a light, follow the direction of the raised edges just so it, catches the paint. And we're just being nice and careful not to try and put too much paint on our other edges that we've already painted, like the loincloth or the flesh. And you don't have to do them grey, so this one's done, but I just wanted to show you mousy brown as such. Where I used Baneblade brown just to highlight this one in the exact same way, and it adds a very subtle tonal difference, but enough of one, I feel. So now we're pretty much there blocking in the colours. We're going to start looking at putting some shades on. Guillimen Flesh for all of the fleshy areas. This is probably my favourite contrast. I think it's just fantastic. Whenever you're doing skin tones, I will use this in some capacity, whether quite thick like this or to thin it right down into a glaze. It is superb. If you're going to get one contrast, I would highly recommend this one. And once that's done, we're going to move on to the armour now, and we're going to just do a little shade of camoshade. I'm going to put it on quite thick. Normally with washes, you're worried about pooling and clogging some of the details. I'm not worried too much about this, just because of the style of how I want it to look. I want it to look grim. Now, the rest of the shades, I'm going to be using oil washes. Don't be alarmed if at this point in the video you're like, well, I don't own any of these. I will give you alternatives, but I highly recommend getting into these. These all came from the range or Hobbycraft. They're quite affordable to get into, and they last forever. I don't think I'll ever use all of these, but I would get for a burnt umber sort of thing, which is, your Agrax Earth shade, a grey and a black, just so you can adjust your black wash. But I promise you, once you start getting into these, your oil colour collection will grow, because they are such fun to use. But I did say I would tell you the alternatives. So a black wash, which should be used for the fur. The camo shade we've already used. Streaking Grime, yes, it is an enamel oil wash, but I suppose a lot of people have this one. You could do the entire model in just that one, and it would work very well. Awesome to have in your arsenal, and obviously Agrax Earth shade, the one and only. So, the umber, just your dark brown. That is all you need, and that will do all 3 models with plenty to spare. And all you do is just add a little bit of thinner or spirit, which again is quite cheap. I think I paid £5 or £6 for like a litre of it. I just want to show you the consistency that I thin them down to, because a lot of people ask me how you know how much to thin it by. In all honesty, the thinner you go, the more chance you've got of the pigment separating and it not working. But you can put it on super thick, and as you've seen with some of my Streaking Grime type videos, you can just wick it away anyway with a bit of thinner. They are super versatile. As you see, I'm just letting it go all over the cloth sections. And the thing I love about oils is the way they run. They run into all the little recesses, and the way it clings and then starts to go over the surface. Fantastic. A lot of you might have, if you play 40k and have painted a lot of tanks, etc., you might use panel liners. It's essentially the same thing. But I like the flexibility in deciding how much thinner, do I want a nice thick, almost solid oil that I'm going to wick away later, or do I want a nice runny wash? And for the armour and weapons, I was going to knock up my own out of oil, but I'm just going to use Streaking Grime because it's so good. It's like a dark browny green. And you can thin it down. So if you look, I've thinned this down with the same thinner. You don't have to use it neat out the pot. You can do, and it works incredibly well, but don't be afraid to have a little play around and just find that consistency you like and gives you the effect you want. So for the fur, I'm going to use this grey oil. Same thing, I'm going to water it down, or thin it down. I shouldn't say water it down. Please don't use water. And I'm just going to go over all the fur. Yet again, I'll try and show the consistency in my little silvery palette, but I hope this helps. This is just how it looks on my wet palette paper, which I've sort of wasted just to show this, and I'm just dabbing it around, moving it around. As you can see, it's so smooth. It's one of the things I like about oil washes. The way they blend transitions is fantastic. And then we're on to taking off the oil washes. So I've just dunked these in a tiny bit of the same thinner that I would normally water down or thin the paint out with. And I'm just going to lightly, almost like dry brush, and dab away some of that wash just to show some of the original colour underneath. And there's other techniques you can use, so you can dab it that are like start mottling and pitting away at that wash, and that can give you some really interesting effects, especially on clothes and any sort of material. You can always put like a texture in it. So these little sponges, I think I paid £2 or £3 off Temu, and I think I've got a pack of 50 with a sponge each end, so essentially 100. Another thing that I get asked quite a bit is, do I varnish these before I do any of this? I don't. I've never needed to. As you can see, no paint is being pulled away from the model, and it's mainly just because of pressure. It's just being light with it and using something that's not very abrasive. That's why I really like the makeup sponges. You can use a cotton bud. Every time I've used a cotton bud, it's pulled away paint. There's just something about it. It just seems a little bit more tougher on the acrylic paint underneath. And yeah, so avoid those. So that's enough of me banging on about oil paints and how much I love them. We're going to start just highlighting this guy back up now. So Orruck Flesh, and we're just going to edge highlight all of the armour, all of the green, I should say. And also just, any chippings or little scratches you want to do in the armour. This is the colour to use. I thinned it ever so slightly on the wet palette, not a great deal, and with edge highlighting, it's mainly using the tip of the brush, using just a bit further down, and you're just scraping the edge of it to catch that ridge. And just to push some of those edges, we're going to use bright yellow green from Pro Acrylic. I absolutely love this paint. And much the same thing, but we're just going to try and be a bit finer with it, and just to catch some of the higher, more raised details. I'd say also don't be afraid, if you don't want to do nice clean lines, just to dab it along, just to like almost give it like a chipping effect. That can also look very effective as well. A nice quick easy win, Ushanti Bone, and I'm just going to put that over the top of the claws and his tootsie nails. I'm then going to use the Rakarth Flesh and just to do a few little edge highlights, a few little raised areas on that loincloth area, just to, you know, help make it pop and define a few of those edges. I'm not going too overboard with the amount, and if you want to push it a little bit further, you could add a tiny bit of white or tiny lighter off-white colour just to push those edges a bit more if you wanted to. So the crystals, or the warpstone, I'm going to use bright grey from AK, but you can use anything that covers well, that's going to basically take a contrast well. So GW wise, I would just be using grey seer, and the 2 thin coats will be great for this. Also, the veins, or the way the warpstone is sort of cracking the skin. If you've got white ink, I would use white ink just to trace that out. Just for when we wash it, it's much easier and it's nice and bright, and it'll just travel really nicely in those crevices. I don't trust my own hand doing it with normal paint. I'd also use it just to dot the eyes as a base before I paint them red later on. So while that's drying, I'm going to do a quick easy win. I'm going to use the Nihilark Oxide. I have no idea how it's said. I should really learn these. Just over the little brassy goldy sections, just to add a nice little pop of colour and a tiny bit of interest. Add as much or as little as you like of this. I tend to add a little bit because I'm always fearful of overdoing it, but I see some people use loads of it and it looks fantastic. Also, to define the scars on this lovely rat ogre, I'm going to use Carroburg Crimson, and I'm just basically going to line all of those scars. Apologies for the camera work on this. Every time I move my hand near it, it tends to autofocus on my fingernails. Luckily they're clean. For the flesh, I'm going to start highlighting it quite roughly. It's not too exact, basically with the original flesh tone, just to lighten it up a little bit, because we're going to add another shade before we're calling it done. One thing you can do with the flesh, if you like, is just add a tiny bit of the next tone up, which I would do with Kislev Flesh, just to make it pop a little bit more. And I would go 50-50 with the original flesh tone. So our warpstones, I'm not going to go too fancy. Striking Scorpion contrast, straight out the pot. There are probably much more interesting and jazzier ways to do the warpstone, but for this I just want them to look very simple and very bright against the rest of the rat ogre. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trust the contrast. And once that's done, I'm going to go on to the flesh again. As I said, there was one more step before I was calling it done. And all I'm doing is using the crimson wash again, and I'm watering it down or thinning it 50%. As you can see, I'm just going to go around the hands, the feet, and just the edges. The large areas of flesh, I'm just going to go around the edges to try and leave that original colour more central. And I'm also going to go over the welts. The welts I'm going to do a second pass of separately, just to help define them. And once that's done, I'm going to come back to the fur and just put a little dry brush of the original lighter grey. Nothing too fancy, just as a tiny little additional pop on the flesh. Now we are pretty much there at this stage, but there's a few little things that I want to do. One of them, the way I do rust. There's loads of different ways, but I use the Dirty Down Rust and the pigment powder, and I mix them together, and I paint over the blade or the armour, what I'm going to do, after about a minute, as it starts to go tacky, I just press against a little bit of kitchen roll, and I love the effect it has. I don't know why, but I just love it. And then, to be honest, that's it. You've just got to base him from here. You could do some of the little silver highlights, which I'm going to do, just edge highlight in the original silver. But that's it. So base him how you like. I'm going to do that with these guys, and I will show you what it looks like after. So here we are with one of the finished boys. I just wanted to show you this one as well, just as an alternative way of doing the armour. So you don't have to do it all the same. Creates a bit of interest when the unit looks slightly different. And these are them, all three of them together. I love how they turned out. I think they look pretty cool. I went with the deserty theme just because it contrasted well against the grey fur. For those of you interested, I don't normally do how I base them, but it was literally AK's desert paint straight out of the pot. Agrax Earthshade wash, dry brushed with Ushanti Bone, and I used some pigment powder on the feet and the bottom of the base, and that is it. It doesn't take long. But thank you for checking out this video. Sorry it's slightly longer than my normal ones. Let's get these guys on the wheel. So as I said, thank you very much again for checking out this Paint by Blunders video. Hopefully I'll see you on the next one. If you haven't already, do consider giving us a little sub, thumbs up, a comment. All those things really do help us out. I say us, me. And yeah, see you soon.